Today, I want to talk about a book that is a true story about a professor who was threatened to be sued by Universal because of a pamphlet that he wrote about E.T. E.T. is one of my favorite movies of all time. I can't wait to talk about this book. It's very interesting. The book is Hollywood and the Professor. I'm Ben Avery, and this is Strangers and Aliens. Everyone, welcome to Strangers and Aliens. Strangers and Aliens is a podcast and a video feed that is about the connecting point between creativity and Christianity, between science fiction and spirituality, between fantasy and faith. And today's topic touches all those things. Now, I'm not actually talking about a book that is a science fiction book or is a fantasy book. Like The Force of Star Wars, it is a book that's actually, well, it's like The Force of Star Wars because it's about a situation dealing with a pamphlet that is like The Force of Star Wars, where a man wrote a pamphlet just taking a look at the spiritual connections between ET and the Gospels. And so then he did this pamphlet and then wrote a book about his experience in creating that pamphlet. And that's what this book is about. It's called Hollywood and the Professor. And yes, if I'm going to ask, is it worth reading? The answer is a conditional yes. I'm going to say yes, it is. And we'll get into why. But I'm also going to get into why I might say no. Usually, when I'm talking about a book that is, less than a year old, I don't usually say no. I don't talk about it at all. If I'm going to say no, I'm just going to leave it alone. But there is a reason to potentially stay away from it, but we'll get into it. The answer really is yes, because it is a very, very interesting book. Look, let's go back in time to 1982, okay? In 1982, if you were a kid, then there were a handful of movies that you might be interested in, but E.T. was the one that everyone was interested in. E.T. was the one that we were talking about at school. E.T. is the one that we were talking about with our family. My experience with E.T. goes back to when I don't know if it was the summer or when it was, but I remember my grandparents and my aunt and uncle were visiting from the States. They had made the 12-hour trek to Sundridge, Ontario. And I remember my dad talking with my grandparents about this movie that he wanted to go and see and maybe take the kids to, called E.T. And I remember him describing it to them. He said it's about an alien who gets left behind on the planet and people are trying to capture him. And that's all I remember my dad saying about the movie at the time. But I was very interested because, of course, I was a nut about Superman. I was a nut about Star Wars. I loved all that kind of thing. Not Star Trek at that time. At that time, Star Trek to me was very bad. It was scary. It was bad. Stay away from it. But E.T. sounded interesting to me, and so the summer of E.T., the summer that movie came out, I got to see that movie in the theater 2 times. We visited my grandparents in the States, and that's when we got to go and see it. And so I got to see the movie 2 times. The first time I saw it was just with my family, just with my parents and my sister. I don't know if my brother, he was a baby. I don't think he would have gone. Maybe I don't know. Anyway, went and saw it with my family. And then we went and visited my cousins who lived about an hour away, and that was really the only chance I got to see them was when we were visiting, going to Michigan to see the grandparents. And I got to see it again. I remember walking to the theater, and my cousin Greg saying, "Hey man, you're really lucky. You got to see this movie twice in the theater." And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." The only other movie like that ended up being Karate Kid Part 2, which I also saw with my cousin Greg and then saw again with a friend. I saw that in the movie theater 2 times. And up until, I mean, I was an adult, really. That was the only time I saw a movie in the theater more than once. I then saw E.T. a third time when they re released it when I was in junior high. And since then, I've seen it in the theater a fourth time because they re released it a few years ago and I went and saw it with my wife. And so, yeah, it's a very special movie to me. It hit all the heartstrings for me when I was a kid. Made me want to cry. It made me want to laugh. It got me excited. It was so much fun and interesting. And I mean, there's just so much to that movie, just the tone and the mood of that movie, and just the music, which plays a big part in tone and mood as well. But the music, the tone, the color palette. It was probably one of the first artistic things where I started, like, I was looking at this thing that was hyper realistic. It was realistic, but at the same time it had this color palette that made it just something else. And now I won't say otherworldly, because it wasn't otherworldly, although there were parts, in the spaceship and stuff. But anyway, I loved that movie as a kid, loved it growing up, love it as an adult. Recently rewatched it about, well, 3 or 4 years ago when I was building a bed for my kids. And I do remember I did censor one of the words out when we watched it with my kids when they were much younger, but we left it in when they were, much older. So anyway, the point being, it's a movie that I really appreciated. And it is a movie that is one of the first movies where I started recognizing some of those spiritual themes that were in there that I would say are not intentionally in there. Now, our author, Dr. Albert E. Miller Jr., I think he wondered when he was writing the thing, if it was intentional or not. But I do remember thinking about it, and I don't remember if it was because I read an article, but I actually do remember vividly actually reading an article talking about the resurrection of ET and drawing a connection to the resurrection of Jesus. And so, but it was a movie that got me thinking. It was a movie that got me feeling, and it was just a movie that hit everything that was I 6 years old, maybe 6 or 7 years old, everything that a 6 or 7 year old kid could want. Let's do the math. 8 years old. No, yeah, 8 years old. I would have been 8 years old. Um, math is hard. It's true. So anyway, I don't remember exactly how I ended up finding this book on Amazon, but I did, and I don't know if it was a Facebook ad or if it was just a recommended read, on Amazon as I was like looking at another item or something like that. But this book, Hollywood and the Professor, came up. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And when I started looking closer at it and maybe reading the blurb, I don't remember exactly where I realized this is about ET, but it is. It's not on the cover. It does not say anything about ET on the cover, but on the back, it sure does. It actually has a newspaper clipping here that says ET and Jesus, Virginia professor warned to drop booklet comparing them. And so I thought, well, that looks really interesting. And so then I ended up looking at the listing on Amazon. It's 96 pages. It is a fast read. Now, obviously, I bought it, but when I saw the cover price of this book, I couldn't believe the cover price. The cover price is 1941. Okay, 1941, which is actually interesting because that's the name of another Spielberg movie, but we're not going to get into that one. uh, 1941, but it was on sale for $4 some cents. I can't remember exactly how much I paid for it. And so I'm thinking, okay, 96 pages, $4. It sounds like an interesting topic. I'm going to get it. It's going to be a tax write-off or whatever for your business purposes because I'm using it for podcasting and that. But anyway, that's why I give it a conditional. Is it worth reading? If you are buying it at a deep discount, like $5 is what it is selling for right now on Amazon. It's $5 as of this moment. I don't know what time when you're watching this, but if it is a $20 book, I would say it probably not worth the $20 for the 96 pages. If you're going to buy this on eBay, the eBay listings I saw, which I wasn't looking on eBay for this book. What I was looking for on eBay was the pamphlet that this book is about. And on eBay, though, this book is going for $25 to $30, and that's without free shipping. Okay, so actually, it might not be. It might be free shipping, but don't quote me on that. I will just say, don't get it on eBay. Just go ahead, get it on Amazon. If it's $5, it's going to be interesting to you. Well, potentially, because of just what this book is about. It's the format of this book reminds me of Inception. Okay. And so here's why. There's layers, right? There's layers. Layer number one, the movie itself, E.T. The movie itself exists. And the author of this book saw the movie and decided when he saw the movie the first time, there's some very interesting parallels between the story of Christ and the story of E.T. And so he went and saw the movie again a second time. and I can't remember. He took his kids the first time, and they were excited to go, but I can't remember if he took his kids the second time or not. He actually did go and see it a third time, but after he saw it the second time, he decided to write this pamphlet called "E.T. You're More Than a Movie Star." And so when he wrote "E.T. You're More Than a Movie Star," it included kind of a poem about ET, just kind of saying, "Who are you?" And you remind me of something. You remind me of someone. And then there's some text that he wrote that kind of gives an introduction to ET and what he was doing with the pamphlet. And then there were 33 similarities and parallels that he found between the story of Christ and the story of ET. So that is layer number two. Now, layer number two is in this book. And then layer number three is he got famous because of this. And the reason he got famous because of this is because when he wrote this pamphlet, he actually put a put an advertisement in a newspaper, but he also put an advertisement in the National Enquirer, I think it was, which, if you remember the National Enquirer, then you remember inquiring minds want to know. I want to know.
Did E.T.'s director cancel his wedding plans after falling for Streisand? Inquiring minds want to know.
I want to know.
He put an ad in the National Enquirer, didn't get very many orders from that, but he got a cease and desist that was actually threatening legal action from Universal's lawyers. Okay. So after all of that blew over, and I'm not going to get into the details and the spoilers of how it all blew over, but after it all blew over, he wrote this book. And the original title of the book was The Flea's Reprieve, I think it was. At least that's the subtitle here. I can't remember now if that was actually the title of what he wrote. But he wrote a book about his experience and his fleeting touch with fame. And then 25 years or 40 years later, but 25 years after he passed away, his daughter took his manuscript and compiled it into this book. And so you have layer number four. Layer number four is his daughter, Dr. Heather E. Millar, putting this book together and selling it and making it available to someone like me who really, really, really appreciates being able to read this book and the pamphlet. So the pamphlet's in here, his original book is in here, and then Dr. Heather Millar wrote an introduction and an afterword. And so it's there's the layers there. Now, the other thing that this book has is, and I just want to kind of briefly cover what the book talks about and kind of give my reaction to that. But it's a reflection, first of all, of 1982, and that's in two parts. And one part of that being reflection of 1982 is that it's a reflection of the popularity of ET in the time. And so he actually talks about, some of the different products that came out. I think that if the movie had not been such a huge hit, and it was a huge, huge hit, I didn't have a whole lot of the products that came out, but I did have an ET action figure, not the plush one, but the smaller plastic one that you had a little lever on his back, and it would lift his neck up and then lower his neck down. It didn't light up, but it had a red spot and where his heart is, and then his arms were very, very long. The problem was he didn't scale well with my action figures. This ET was as tall as my Star Wars action figures. And so you play with the Star Wars action figures and ET together, he was monstrous. He was just enormous. And so he was never ET when I was playing with that action figure with my other action figures. He was a monster, usually some sort of weird creature or something like that. Anyway, I had that. I had the storybook. And I really didn't have much more than that. It just really, I had the Atari 2600 video game, which really deserves its own episode if I'm going to talk about the Atari 2600 video game. It is not the worst video game ever. It is not. I spent hours and hours and hours loving that game, playing that game, enjoying that game, defeating that game. That's one of the reasons why I loved it. It was an Atari 2600 game that you actually could win. But this episode is not about that. Okay. So anyway, everywhere you go, you would see ET products, and there was ET Underoos, and there was ET this and ET that. There was just a ton of that stuff. and it was a pop culture phenomenon. All right. So this book gets into that somewhat and gets into just what it was to have this pop culture phenomenon for that movie. Second, in that 1982 reflection, is a reflection of fame. And it's a reflection of just a regular guy who had no intention of being famous, had no intention of having to field phone calls from newspapers and having to do interviews with the BBC and having to do, I mean, this guy, he had months of just this very strange, odd situation happen to him in life that he was not expecting, that he was not desiring, but that he very much appreciated because of what it brought along with it. And so this is a reflection of fame back then. Now, his daughter subtitles this "A True Story About My Dad Going Viral in the '80s," and so that's also kind of an interesting thing to consider. Is that we think about going viral now, where you're talking about like your video of your meltdown at a police stop or something, the police's body cam footage going viral. We think of going viral as I wrote a song and 2 million people watched it, and now I have 1 million subscribers on YouTube. That's going viral now, but back then, when you think about it, this fleeting touch that he had with fame really was kind of that going viral kind of experience. And so those two things are very interesting reflections. And then there's a reflection also in this book about the spiritual and Christian allusions found in E.T. Now, here's what's interesting to me about those. All 33 of them are in there, and they are presented as he originally wrote them. And so you actually get to read the pamphlet. I wish that there was some sort of there's photos of him and his family, and there's photos of newspaper clippings, and there's even a photo of a Ziggy comic, okay, that was sent to him by the guy who did Ziggy, okay. Um, so I think it's Tom Wilson, but I believe Tom Wilson sent this to Dr. Arthur Miller, um, and the cartoon just has Ziggy um, looking at his the nativity scene under the Christmas tree, and he's saying, "What's ET doing in the nativity scene?" But anyway, which I might have seen that when I was a kid. I don't remember if I did or not. But looking at it, it's funny without the context too, because we all know kids put toys in the nativity scene. What's also kind of funny is that his pet cat, pet dog, and pet duck, they're the only people who live with him, and so who put who put ET in the nativity set. So anyway, the point being that he all 33 things from the pamphlet are in there. I wish there would have been an actual reproduction of the pamphlet, but there's not. But it is reprinted in there. Then he also has some thoughts that he had right afterward, where he kind of expanded on those 33 thoughts. And then there's one more chapter where he adds to it. Okay. So the thing about the spiritual applications that he brings to ET and to the movie is some of them are obvious. Okay. Some of them are not something that would think you don't have to squint too hard to see. Some of them are really insightful. Some of them, as you're looking at it, you're like, oh, actually, that's very interesting. The way that the ET story reflects that from the life of Christ. There are, and I do appreciate it, okay, but there are some weak connections, okay. And if you know me, you know when I talk about some films and some books and stuff, sometimes I talk about the weak connections with Scripture, okay. Um, Weak connections, strong applications, hopefully, okay, but they're there. And then there are a couple, and I'm not going to go into which ones right now. Maybe I'll do a follow up if people are interested, but there are some really weak connections, okay. There's a couple of them where I'm like, oh man, really? I don't see that at all. I'm sorry. It's also interesting because he goes back and forth where he's trying to figure out if Melissa Matheson and Steven Spielberg, so writer director, if it was intentional or not. And some of the things that he's talking about, they I believe are intentional in the sense that the the story of Christ reflects. I shouldn't say the story of Christ reflects, but our own myth making and hero's journey reflects the life of Christ. And so there's things in there that you just can't get away from if you are trying to write a story about someone who comes and changes people's lives, about someone who is there as a catalyst for significant life change. There's going to be reflections of Christ in that. There's just no way around it. That's what's going to happen. There are also some things that he brings up that are very interesting that I wouldn't have thought about, and like I said, they're insightful. And then there's some things that he brings up where I'm just like, that was weak. Actually, I'll go ahead and give you the one that is the weakest. And he actually acknowledges that it might be a little bit of a stretch, but then he defends it as well. But in one of the 33 things that he talks about, uh, one that's obvious that is the resurrection of ET, kind of reflecting the resurrection of Christ. Okay, and then there's the whole idea that ET must die so that Elliot could live, and that is something that had to happen. And so those are two of them, and I'm really on board with those. Okay, those there's a reflection there. But where I'm not on board was that there is alcohol in both stories, the story of Christ and the story of ET. Now, the story of Christ, it's a miracle and a cultural thing that he is actually participating in to really, to first of all, it's his first miracle. And second of all, it's his mother coming to him and saying, "Hey, can you help out in this situation?" And there's a whole lot of things that can be said about Jesus turning water into wine. But Jesus turning water into wine to me is not a parallel with ET getting drunk on the Budweiser in the refrigerator. Okay. And so that one's kind of a, to me, funny, that's a really, really weak connection. But anyway, like I said, ET must die so Elliot can live. Um, and there's some reflections that he had that I found interesting, just about how you have this kind of Gethsemane moment where Elliot and ET go out, and ET is putting out the call to his mothership, and that kind of reflects Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and that's one where I would call that a weak connection, but it's kind of the weak connection that I can get on board with. All right. So anyway, but there's 33 of these things, and really they are just immediate reflections that he had right away that he wrote down. Okay, so he starts selling these things for $1 to cover postage and printing. Okay, and he gets a cease and desist letter. The cease and desist letter is reprinted in the book, and also his lawyers immediate response, because they had to respond like within hours of getting that cease and desist letter. The immediate response from his lawyer is in there. Another letter that he wrote when he first wrote the pamphlet, he wrote a letter to Steven Spielberg saying, "Hey, you think I could do this?" And no one ever responded to that, but that is also in here. And so you have the whole story of the lawsuit that was threatened and everything. I keep saying threatened, so it's probably not much of a spoiler to say that he didn't end up getting sued. But that's not the story that's interesting, although it is interesting in its own way because of just those behind the scenes things. But really, fair use is here. I mean, he created um, a scholarly work, where he is not trying to steal from the people who created ET. By writing this, he was not doing his own thing that takes the place of ET. He was not doing a pirate plush ET trying to steal sales from them. In fact, the fact that he was selling it for $1 tells you he was not going after a profit. He just didn't want to, go broke. He wanted to, make back what he spent on printing. And so it's not much of a spoiler when I keep saying the attempted lawsuit, or the threatened lawsuit. But it is interesting too, just the way that all pans out, and I don't want to give that away, and just the way that he discovers what was going on, and then all the things that happened because of the publicity from the lawsuit. And it's very, very interesting to me, again, to kind of step back into 1982 and to just see what happens when this man is confronted with fame. And so the fourth thing that this is a reflection of the popularity of ET. It's a reflection of fame and going viral, so to speak, in the 1980s. It's a reflection on those spiritual illusions and spiritual connections found in ET. But it's also a touching tribute to a father. And I really appreciated this. And I've tried to find, no, I didn't try, I didn't like go too deep in a dive. There's no websites or anything here to find Dr. Heather Miller. But if you do see this, Dr. Miller, I really appreciated this book, and I'm very thankful that you put it out there. And I do love that you were trying to and succeeding in honoring your father by putting this book out for him. I'm curious what would have happened if he would have tried to publish this back in the '80s. But I'm very glad that you did it, and I'm very thankful for this book. So if I never ever send an email to you or anything like that, and you happen to come across this video, this is just a very heartfelt thank you to you for doing this tribute to your father and for allowing me as a reader to experience what he had written. And so I do wish, man, I wish I could have had a conversation with him about these 33 things. People sent him letters. There's examples of letters that he received. I mean, just the story behind all these different things. And there's one really, really, and I hesitate to tell this part of the story because I don't want to give too much away, but there's one really touching thing where there was a family and their child had cancer, and they took their child to see this movie. It was something he really wanted to see. And when he saw the movie afterward, he said Jesus was in that film or something like that. And they didn't quite like there. No, he wasn't. It's about a weird looking alien. And then the child passed away, but then they came across the pamphlet. I think they came across like a newspaper article about the pamphlet, and then they contacted him and said, "I think we understand what our son was saying." And it's really nice. It's a really touching little moment, and it was something that for him validated what he had done, and he would have never gotten the reach with the actual pamphlet that got because of all the publicity from the newspaper articles and being featured in People Weekly and things like that. So I believe he's even featured on Entertainment Tonight and mentioned on many, many news programs and did lots and lots of interviews. And for a period of time, it was a nuisance. It was a huge fear because of that looming lawsuit. Anyone who's had a looming lawsuit, I haven't, but anyone who has had that kind of thing hanging over them, even if it wasn't going to go anywhere, even if they knew that they were going to come through unscathed and it was going to be not a problem, it still is a huge, huge stressor. And so his story, even though it's short, I mean, it's 96 pages. I read most of it while I was just doing a walk. um, I do when I walk inside my house. We have a very large living room that I'm able to walk around and get some good laps in. I can get about a mile and a half in 40 minutes or whatever. So I read more than half of it on my walk and then sat down and finished the rest of it this afternoon. And it's a quick read, but to me, it's well worth the $4, $5, maybe even the $6 if you got it on Kindle. And I'm saying it's well worth buying with no links. Okay, there's no links in the comments below or whatever. There's no links to this book as far as like getting a kickback for myself. Sometimes I do that with books, but I'm not going to do that with this one because honestly, I truly want to recommend it. And um, not that when I do have links, I'm not truly recommending it. I mean, if I'm talking about that hideous strength and there's a link there, I do really, really recommend it. But anyway, I really recommend this book, and I think it's worth reading. I think it'd be a hard sell for me to say, yeah, purchase it at $20, but right now on sale, I don't know if they're just going to keep that sale price going or not. So anyway, all that said, I liked the book. I love the movie, and I am so glad that I had an opportunity to read Dr. Miller's story, and to just see the loving tribute from his daughters. So all that said, I do have a new book coming out very, very soon. Here in November, it'll be coming out. It's called Parabolic Orbits, and I might put a picture of the cover right here. If I don't, I should, because we just did a cover reveal, and it is an amazing cover by Jeff Slemons. I hope you check it out. You can go to benavery.com/orbits, where you'll get put on my newsletter, and you will be notified and reminded of when the actual book comes out. But it is 14 parables of Jesus that were turned into science fiction stories. And so it actually kind of goes along with what Dr. Miller was talking about with E.T., where he was kind of looking at E.T. as a parable about Christ, a science fiction parable about Christ. Well, we're taking Christ's parables and turning them into science fiction stories. So, yeah, thank you so much for spending time with me. And thank you so much for letting me geek out about a movie that I absolutely adore and a book that I truly, truly enjoyed. So, until next time, be good. and Godspeed. Math is hard. It's true.